Oh, hello. In today's video, I want to talk about Talisman, 5th edition. What are we doing? So Talisman is a board game. Am I a board game review channel now? No, I'm making an exception. So if you don't know, Talisman was a game originally produced by Games Workshop in the 80s, when they were still trying to decide what they were. Fun fact, Games Workshop started out manufacturing like backgammon sets and Mancala sets. That's why the name's Games Workshop. Like, they're not. It was a long road to become the company we know today. And then Games Workshop had a difficult time. There was the management buyout, the merger with Citadel, the split from Ian Livingston, and weirdly, Games Workshop PLC, the Games Workshop we know and love today, has retained the rights to Talisman, even though arguably it doesn't really fit right with the rest of the Games Workshop stable of IPs and things that they own. But they retain control of it. But they're not that interested in making their own version of Talisman. It's not like Space Hulk. It's not something they make themselves and put their own miniatures in the box. They sort of license it out to other companies over the years. It's been with it was with Fantasy Flight for a long time, and then it went somewhere, and there were loads of weird, like for a while you could get Star Wars Talisman, and maybe even like Simpsons Talisman. Like, it literally became like the Monopoly thing where you could get all kind of weird licensed versions of Talisman. And now it's with Avalon Hill, who are a board game company who I think are wholly owned by Hasbro, in that vaguely kind of hands-off way that Hasbro does, where it buys a company but then that company keeps going. And they've come out with their own version of Talisman 5th edition. So I've included the copyright sort of page down here so you can kind of see the mess that it is. We've got Talisman 5th edition, copyright Games Workshop Limited, 2024, Talisman, the Talisman logo, Games Workshop GW, the Winged Hammer Warhammer logo, and all associated logos, images, illustrations, weapons, and characters are either trademark or copyright Games Workshop Limited. So yeah, that's what I was trying to explain. Meanwhile, Avalon Hill and Hasbro, separate company. So I guess it's a Games Workshop game produced under license. The other interesting wrinkle, and why, as Games Workshop people, we might be interested in keeping track of what's happening with Talisman. Interesting little credit here. Special thanks to Guy Haley for world building contributions. Who he? Acclaimed Black Library author Guy Haley. And according to his little bio, which I pulled from the Black Library website, a former editor of White Dwarf. So, yeah, it's of interest to Games Workshop, to Games Workshop fans, Games Workshop people, but it is not a Games Workshop product. It is an IP that they own, a system that they own, that they license out. So I got it for Christmas. This is the last of my little videos of things that I got for Christmas that I want to chat about, because they're like adjacent to this hobby that we have. And I thought it was interesting. So what is Talisman? Like I said, it's been around since the 80s. And if you've been in Games Workshop adjacent circles, you've probably played an edition of Talisman or another. I like board games. I own like maybe 20 different board games. I don't play them very often. I'm kind of aware of board gamer culture, but I'm not of the board gamer culture, right? And Talisman is, it's probably a good description of what Talisman is. It doesn't really fit into the modern board game landscape. It does some very old-fashioned old board game things, right? That modern board game designers would sort of wrinkle the bridges of their noses at. You roll a dice and you get to move that many squares. And that's, for those of you that haven't played a board game other than like Monopoly, that's not a thing that modern board game people like anymore. It's essentially it's a race to get to the middle and defeat a dragon. And what makes it interesting, and at the time, obviously, board games now are all about player choice and player agency. Board games, when this came out, were very kind of, Monopoly and things like that. So you've got this thing where there's it's a weird halfway house. It's probably very culturally important for arriving at the board games we play now, but it feels almost weird and dated and very close to those old family favourite board games in some senses, but at the time it was quite revolutionary, but now it's old, if that makes sense. You have agency in that you control which way around you go on the map. You control when you decide to move into the middle. So essentially you have 3 circles, and you start on the outside circle, and you can move left and right. So we roll the dice, and then you have two choices for squares that you could land on, and you choose which way around you want to go. And then if you're going past one of the places where you could cross over into the middle, you can choose instead to turn and pivot and go into the middle. And what you're essentially doing, it's like a World of Warcraft or D&D or something, you're going around killing boars, essentially. To use the World of Warcraft reference, you're going around killing boars in the forest until you acquire enough levels and enough loot to go off into the middle and try and defeat the dragon. And it is a race. And you can also you can fight against the players. You can indulge in the PvP as well if that's what you want to do. Yeah. It has a reputation for a game that lasts for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And it can. It doesn't have any kind of natural mechanic to draw the game to a close. If the players are content to wander around in a circle and level up, then they can do that forever. And the game won't force them to try and jump into the middle. So it does have that as a kind of failure state, I guess. But if you're aware of it, you can avoid falling into that trap. And it only takes one person in the group to be like, right, I'm going to go into the second circle. I'm going to go into the middle. I'm going to do that. And then everyone else has to be like, oh, blimey, he's doing that. Well, I have to try and do something. So that's the common thing. But I do enjoy Talisman. It is a fun game, suitable for families, and if you have young kids and you want to introduce them to the very classic, if you want to try and pull them into the nerd sphere and introduce them to the very classic fantasy tropes of like, this is a fighter, this is a dwarf, this is a thief, this is an elf has bow, dwarf has big axe, dwarf hardy and slow and good at fighting, elf quick and weak and a bit magical and good at fighting. This is a wizard, bad at fighting, excellent at spells. Like, if you want to get your kids into those kind of basic fantasy tropes, a stepping stone to them becoming someone who is literate in that sort of nerd culture, that's really what I think this game is for. It's certainly why I wanted it to try and have something to play at the moment with my 14-year-old stepson, and then in years to come with my daughter when she grows up a little bit more. That's basically where it sits. Yeah, I'm not going to try and fully explain and teach you the rules of Talisman though, because I'm going to assume that most people watching this, perhaps wrongly assume, I'm going to assume most people watching this are faintly familiar with Talisman, but I'm just going to sort of generally. That's kind of my general overview. So there have been some changes, so some explicit rules changes. Now, I'm going to go through these very quickly. So they presented us a page. These are the things that are different for this edition. So they have changed things about the edition. Now, to go through, you win by obtaining a talisman, reaching the crown of command in the centre of the board, and defeating the dragon. Previous to that, there was, in Talisman originally, there was a clean-up sort of step where you had the crown of command, it stopped the other players respawning, you had an extremely powerful spell, so they basically truncated that phase at the end because it felt kind of pointless. I think that's something people were commonly house ruling anyway. You can choose your character, that's the default, rather than having your characters randomly dealt. So the idea is that you choose your character, and then that you pass the deck to someone else, and then everyone chooses their character, and then the last player that chooses their character and therefore has less choice, they get the first turn. So that's quite nice. Your characters have an alignment, so they are good, evil, or neutral. And generally speaking, mechanically, good and evil are, I would suggest, roughly balanced. Like, there are certain artifacts that say, good players gain this benefit, evil players gain that benefit, good players can't wield this, evil players can't wield that. Neutral is a little bit different in that there is less kind of straightforward buffs for being neutral. But if it's equipment that good and evil players can't wield, well, you can wield all of it. If there's squares that would give a negative effect to one and a positive effect to the other, then you can just kind of go there and go, So I think it's a player agency thing that you can choose if you want to be good or evil. No one wants to say, I fancy playing this character. That's cool. You have to be evil. You want to play a wizard. I think the wizard by default is evil, and it's like, well, what if I want to play a kind of a Gandalf-like character? That's cool. You can pick the wizard, and then you can just choose to be good, and it kind of helps it have that little role-playing element, which is cool. The carrying limit. So in the original game, you had a limit of 4 things you can carry. And then people would get a talisman. You needed a talisman to progress in the game, but then the talisman would feel, if you got a talisman really early, it would feel like a negative thing because you were lugging this talisman around for ages before you would need it, and it would use up one of your carrying slots. Whereas now the talisman kind of just goes in its own little talisman slot. Each character can hold one talisman, and once you've got a talisman, you can't drop it, which is nice. Death. So it used to be the case that when you died, you basically were dead, and you had to just play a new character and start again, while everyone else was still quite powerful. Now you basically respawn at the village, you lose all your life, and you're forced to buy life from the village for 1 gold per life. If you have no gold, you respawn on 1 life. But otherwise you keep all your other bits and pieces, all your buffs, all your items, all your followers, all your things. You just get to respawn. You can spend a fate token to... So you get a certain number of fate tokens that are like CP rerolls, I guess, and generally they used to reroll a dice, but you can spend a fate token, instead of rolling a dice to move, to go, I'm going to move precisely 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 spaces. And lastly, there are certain mechanics in the game that turn you into a toad. Previously, you used to drop all of your gold and objects on a square, and they'd be quite prone to having them stolen. Whereas now, you effectively still miss a turn. You can't benefit from things, do things while you're a toad. But when you untoad, you just get all your stuff back. Now, I played this over the New Year's with a friend of mine who'd played some Talisman before, and apparently there are some other changes as well. The way that you level up, or so my friend was telling me, the way that you level up has changed. It's now faintly logarithmic. So, not log, is that the word I mean? Probably not. But it's like in an RPG where, if your strength is 2, then you have to trade in creatures up to a value of 2 to get strength 3. And then when your strength is 3, you have to trade in creatures up to a value of 3. And then when your strength is like 12, you have to trade in creatures up to a value of 12. And so it makes it easy to level up first. And then as your stats get higher, it's harder to level up. Apparently, it wasn't always like that. But that's not presented on this page, so I'm not quite sure what the score is. Maybe that was a rules change from like 3rd edition to 4th edition. My friend had played 3rd edition. That's quite possible as well. I'm not a Talisman expert. Like, I played it a couple of times, so I'll buy my own copy. So now I want to say there are alternate rules in the back, and some of the alternate rules in the back are the Diatoad, the Fatality, and the Character Selection alternate rules. The Diatoad alternate rules basically puts back in the old, more punishing rules for turning into a toad from the previous edition, so you get them, you haven't lost anything. The Fatality alternate rules put in the older, more punishing rules for character death. And the character selection rules give you some options. You can either just put it in so it's fully random, or they give you an idea where you each get dealt 2 cards, and then you choose one of the 2, and you can do that. You also have a race to win alternate rule, where you don't have to defeat the dragon, you just get into the middle square and you win to make the game even faster, which I think is a bit lame myself, but there you go. So it's quite clear with all these changes, they're trying to make the game, they're trying to tweak it to make it slightly more modern, to make you have slightly more player agency about certain things, and they're also trying to make the game easier, right? Now, making it easier isn't... If it was a player versus environment game, if it was something like Pandemic, and making it easier or harder wouldn't necessarily be a good thing. But since it's a PvP game, making it easier, like everyone's playing the same rules, it just makes it funner, especially with younger players, I think. And then the majority of the things they've changed, you've got the alternate rules here to put them back if you want to. But I introduced Talisman to my stepson, who is 14, and if we'd been playing with the old school fatality rules and he died, then he probably wouldn't have had a nice time and wouldn't have wanted to play Talisman again, right? So I think it's a positive thing, but I'm sure people who are big long-term Talisman fans will have opinions for sure. We are on the internet, and do share your opinions down below. So what else to talk about? The actual product, right? The general presentation. I think the game is presented well. I enjoy the visual style. Some people have been complaining about the art. I didn't go through and photograph every single character card, but you can see the troll there on top. It's a bit generic fantasy, and if I'm being critical, it's a bit World of Warcraft, I suppose. But could you do something with the Talisman license and commission some really beautiful art and make something that was slightly whimsical and more kind of straightforwardly Tolkien-esque? You could, and this isn't that. It is a bit more middle of the road modern fantasy, but I like it. In terms of the physical pieces, you got cones, right? Famous South Park parody of Talisman was called the Cones of Dunshire. You do have a lot of cones. The cones are cones. They're plastic cones. They're fine. You get gold coins that are nice, but they have a bit of a play money vibe to them, which kind of put me off. Like, if you've got little children and you ever bought them money from a children's toy shop to play shops and stuff, the money very much has that vibe to it. I don't know what they could have done differently, but I don't like handling the little gold coins. Also, at least for when we played it, you get far more gold coins than I can think a person would reasonably need, although it does do the Monopoly thing of being when you run out of life cones and you can't, no one can have any more life buffs, and when you run out of gold, no one can have any more gold, so that's the thing. And then you get the card tokens. I think the card tokens are fine. Card stock, pretty standard stuff, thicker than Kill Team, for sure. Thicker than Games Workshop tends to do, but yeah, I'm quite happy with them. So, I know what you're all here to see. I put the map here first, didn't I? The next slide is what we're all here to see. The map. Some people don't like the map. I think it's nice, it's bright, it's bordering on garish. Some people don't like it because everything is facing inwards. So all the art is oriented so that it's sort of facing into the center of the map, which means that whenever you're on the table, the squares closest to you are upside down, and the squares that are oriented facing towards you are the ones on the far side of the board, if that makes sense, which some people have flagged up as a negative play experience. I don't mind. I think it's quite good. Some people have suggested that some of this artwork might have been not wholly AI generated, but that there are some bits where they think, oh well, an AI's helped craft that element, because there are some bits where it does seem a little bit fudgy in places, So I'm not going to say that it's a work of art, and certainly if you had commissioned a famous fantasy artist to do a Talisman set, it could be a real thing of beauty, you know. And so this does feel a bit modern and a bit cheap in that regard, in that the art does seem a little bit just... It's hard to put your finger on it. It's got that weirdly mass-produced feel. I have no idea whether AI was used in the creation of this art, but I can see why some people have reached that conclusion. How much that takes away from your enjoyment of the set, it's hard to say. But when you review something like Talisman, really only... it's only the superficial... the underlying game is, like I say, it goes back to the 80s. So it's really only the superficial stuff that you can talk about, right? Now, I'm happy with it. But then I didn't own my own set of Talisman. And it's something that I kind of wanted. And the previous edition had really overwhelming quantity of expansions. So part of me kind of, almost like a new edition of Warhammer, right? You wait until they do a big reset and you're like, cool, I want to get that one. And then I'm in on the ground floor. I think there is one expansion out for this game at the moment, but it seems like a manageable thing if you were going to keep up with it. It seems like a manageable thing you could do, whereas getting into the 4th edition Talisman, which was a very mature game, there was a mind-boggling array of expansions for you to go and buy, right? Bearing in mind it's a game I'll probably play 4 or 5 times a year maximum, right? Yeah, the minis. The minis is what I thought we were looking at next. So I've pictured all the minis on the screen. You get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 characters to choose from in this edition. Some people have said that, there are characters missing, that there should be. Like I said, previous editions of Talisman have had expansions, and the cast of characters that have been in the box game and have been in the expansions has changed. You have most of your common, fantasy tropes. You have fighter, thief, priest, sorceress, wizard. That's along the top. And then along the bottom... I'm struggling with what that one's supposed to be. I think it's the assassin, elf, the ghoul, prophetess, and the monk. And then over on the right hand side you got the 2 non-human ones. You got the troll and the little dwarf. Now, in terms of miniatures, these are, I would suggest, really a nice example of what they are. And what they are is that very standard board game company PVC. So they are soft in terms of the fact they're malleable. There are a couple of mould lines, not that many, but if you look at the elf, the archer there on the bottom row, second one in, for example, and if you look at the arm guard, the bracer there, the big mould line there, and then there's a bit of a mould line by the cloak. I could clean them up, right? The miniatures are really interesting because in places the detail looks soft, and then in places you notice that there's really quite nice detail. For example, I'm really taken with the monk. I think that's a really characterful face. I like the way that he's wearing a talisman around his neck. I think that looks really cool. Meanwhile, the ghoul, just to pick out my least favourite sculpt, I think they were struggling a little bit with what he was even all about, right? His face, he kind of looks like, I don't know, you could probably do something quite nice with it with paint, but will I get around to painting these, given all the Warhammer that I could be painting? Probably not. Would they look much cooler if they were painted? Yes, they would. They're not the nicest miniatures in the world, but I'm coming at this from a wargamer's point of view. Now, what's frustrating, could Games Workshop turn around and do, possibly not now, depending on what kind of exclusivity they've given to Avalon Hill, but could Games Workshop, in theory, turn around and do a deluxe edition of Talisman aimed at, people like me, where it's actually, we're going to put these hard plastic characters in. They could do that, right? I don't think they want to. I think if they were going to make something like that, they'd sooner make a Warhammer Quest game, which you kind of view Warhammer Quest as something that evolved out of Talisman, right? Like it's Talisman in the sense that it is a board game that is an RPG, but Warhammer Quest is cooperative, right? And then so similar kinds of things, but I think they wouldn't want to do that because they wouldn't want to confuse their market by releasing something with their models in that wasn't their IP. Could you do a Warhammer Talisman? Age of Sigmar Talisman? Yes. But would you somehow... That might fall between two stools where the people that like it because it's Talisman wouldn't like it because it's a weird thing, and the people that like Warhammer stuff wouldn't like it because it's the gameplay's not very modern and cool. So this is what we have, and the minis are, they're not bad. Again, I just feel like I'm coming at this from the perspective. I'm pretty sure if you're a board game person, you're comparing these against other board game miniatures, you probably think these are a really good example of what they are. Just I'm coming at it from a the Warhammer side of the fence, right? No assembly, these are all one piece, as is standard for the board game markets. They don't want to assume that their players want to involve themselves with clippers and glue and things, so all one piece. Yeah. So final thoughts. Are you a Talisman person? Do you love Talisman? Do you hate Talisman? Do you love Talisman and have strong feelings about the way that they've ruined it in 5th edition? Do you have a favourite edition of Talisman? There's been 5. Is there some grossly important finicky thing that I have glossed over because I've probably played less than a dozen games of Talisman across all editions that you as the true sort of Talisman grog can come and enlighten us about? That would be interesting as well. Perhaps you loathe Talisman because you're somebody that believes, it's one of those games that just lasts forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever, and you'd rather be spending your time doing literally anything else. Maybe you clicked onto this because you'll follow me for Kill Team content, or maybe something else, presumably mainly Kill Team stuff, and you're like, I've never heard of Talisman, because Games Workshop deep lore, I guess, in a way. The other one that they still own is the Dracula game, where you're chasing Dracula around Europe, which is also a really good game, actually, that has nothing to do with Space Marines that Games Workshop also still owns, I think. Yeah, this is the last video in this kind of little subgenre of the things that I got for Christmas that I want to talk about. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I can't bear the idea of doing a faction rundown when there might be a balanced data slate like tomorrow. That might change robustly, like I don't want to make a video that's just lies within a day. So, but we're basically running out of other things to talk about. So pretty soon, gonna have to get back on that faction rundown train. But I'm really hoping beyond hope that there is a balanced data slate tomorrow or Thursday. No, sorry, Wednesday. Wednesday is the day. I hope it is. I'm streaming tomorrow, so do join the live stream. If you're watching this on Monday night, I'll be streaming on Tuesday, 7:30 till 10 p.m. UK time. Look forward to seeing you there. Yeah, have a good one. Alright guys, I'll see you there. Bye bye. Bye bye bye. Bye bye. Goodbye. Bye.